Welcome to Superchargers. Let's go. G'day guys, I'm Daniel Thomas, and on this episode I am joined by Daniel Schwarzhoff, who is the CEO of the CAP company and the voice of the Non-Contemplative Meditation technique. Dan shares how at age 6 he discovered the essence of what he would later develop into non-contemplative meditation. In the early 80s he began refining the technique through which he overcame challenges around alcoholism, drug abuse and mental health issues. Dan has helped thousands through his books, videos, blogs and now the CAP. Here is my conversation with Daniel Schwarzhoff.
I treat nerves these days just as a sign that I care, you know.
I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing because that's what I'm all about too, is walking through your fears and, doing it anyway,
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
yeah.
And I heard someone say the other day, despite everything that's going on or the anxieties or the daily struggles you might be feeling, it's like, well, just do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
Absolutely.
So
And it's amazing. And you've done film work, I think, right?
I have, yeah.
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 And which is a whole nother ball game. I've never done, well, I've been a little bit, but I'm not an actor like you are. I'm a horrible actor, as a matter of fact. But I've been on stage acting in things. There's summer theater up here, and a number of years ago, I got involved with that. And the time before, like the minutes leading up to curtain, and it's like just waiting, and you hear the orchestra, and you hear the crowd, you hear the audience filling in the theater, and the orchestra is going through their rigmarole, and and then all of a sudden, oh my God. And the curtain goes up and the lights are out and you got to jump out and start acting. In this case, it was singing and dancing. It's like, it's very scary.
I haven't done theater,
scary.
but I was in bands. That's what brought me to Europe. So kind of playing.
Okay.
Yeah, playing in bands was kind of my theater. But in terms of what you're saying, I think there's a big element of trust in the preparation. If you've prepared,
You have to be prepared. Yeah, if you're prepared. Yeah.
and then when you're
And
standing behind that curtain, just trust, which is a difficult thing to do. Yeah.
I've never been in a band, but before we start, I'll tell you something real quick about being on a.
I think we're going actually. I think I tend to
we're
launch
going
straight
already.
in. Yeah,
All
I
right.
tend to launch straight in. This is all interesting
Oh,
stuff. So
all
we
right.
may as
Well,
well, we just.
okay. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, well, I'll tell you something real quick about being in a band. I've never been in a band, but I play a little guitar, and I'm a very good singer. And I used to be. I think my voice is. I don't practice enough, but I was in this show, and they wrote this part for me. It was a summer theater, and I was supposed to come out. I was the lead character. At that time I had long hair, real long hair, and I looked like a rock and roll type of guy, And so they created this part, which is sort of a cross between Tim Curry and Alice Cooper type of character, and they put makeup on my eyes and all of that stuff, and I had to come out and play the song that I had to start on the stage was solo, just me and a guitar. That's it. I only had to do a couple of power chords. That was it. And it was I'm a Human Being by the New York Dolls. And it's on stage, so you can't just play. You have to just, you have to keep moving. Yeah, exactly. So I had been practicing my windmills, with my guitar, and my hands were all chewed up. I don't know how Pete Townsend ever did it. My hands were all bloodied from practicing for a month. And I came out and, I was an evil rock and roll character, and I came out on the stage out of a castle, and the castle had all, it was eerie and lighting was dark, and there was smoke was rolling on, and I came out of the castle, and I started and I hit my first chord. It was nothing. No sound, nothing at all. It was opening night, and all I had to play was 3 chords and start this song, and it was nothing came out. And my daughter was in the show. She was I won't go into the details. She was my roadie in the show, and I handed her the guitar, and I had to ad lib in the moment, and all the local newspapers were in the audience, and they were going to review the show and everything. And I just said, well, rock and roll is boring anyway, you know. And then we went on with the show, and I found out that I wasn't plugged in. There was
Mm,
I was wired for sound. My voice was wired for sound, but my guitar was a
unplugged.
hard wire. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was plugged in. It wasn't plugged in,
Mm.
so I had no amp. It was terrible. Anyway,
It's really interesting you say that actually. I've spoken about it a bit, but because I had those moments on stage where you sort of got to sink or swim in the moment, and I think they actually teach us a lot. Like from my experience, that the things that went wrong on stage, there was a
yes,
tremendous amount of kind of rapid personal growth that happened in a short amount of time. What you're speaking of reminds me of a time where I was literally like on the drums in Windsor Castle, near Windsor Castle in the UK, in a big old ticket hall, so very boomy sound, but it was full, like 500 people, and
right.
my kick pedal on my bass drum actually snapped and flew over my shoulder, and we were a three-piece, so it could have been a chance for one of the guys to get on the mic and perhaps make a joke or say,
Yeah, yeah.
tell a bit about our journey, but they just turned around and looked at me, and I
No, that's
I
not right.
was I was crawling around on my hands and knees on this stage, and to bring it back to the point, it felt like an eternity. I'm sure it was only 2 or 3 minutes, but this time with all the eyeballs on me and me freaking out in the moment, I think because I had to really compose myself, which I think ties into what we're talking about, what we will talk about in terms of meditation and
Hmm.
presence, in terms of having to ground myself in that moment. It felt like an uh, so accelerated growth in those moments. It sounds like for
You do.
you.
You walk through it, and the funny thing is, that moment, had you known that was going to happen ahead of time, uh, maybe you could have prevented it. But that's what fear does. Fear is projecting something ahead of time that hasn't even happened yet, may not happen, and then you freeze up ahead,
Mm.
and your
So
emotions rise.
exactly, and there's just things you can't account for, even with the
No,
preparation.
no. Well,
Um, s-
it sounds like you survived it.
I survived it, but I always
Yeah.
remember that instant, and you reminded me of it. And I mean, that just happens all the time with live performance, with things
Oh yeah.
things
Oh yeah.
going wrong. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I just think those moments where you lean into that discomfort, that's where the growth happens. As uncomfortable as those moments are, I think they teach you things about yourself.
It does, and you need that stimulation too. I'm not a neuroscientist or anything, but I read a few things, and you need that stimulation to keep your brain healthy.
Mm.
You know, you need to walk through your fears. If you run from fears, um, that's no good. You get stagnant. You get stale.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah.
especially when the stakes are up. It
When the
kind of
stakes are up, especially in
intensifies the.
relationships, in business, in career, all of it, you have to go through it. It just
Mm,
you having a podcast is it's a risky thing to go into and to try
mm.
to do. And you do a pretty good job, by the way.
I
I like
appreciate
you.
that. I'm quite hard on myself. It's still something I struggle with. But I think I was going to say on the acting thing as well. Like, I think it takes a certain amount of self-awareness and empathy in acting. But in terms of the podcasting, it's similar. It's been a real exercise in listening, focused listening. Um,
Right,
and I think it's
right.
made me. I just recommend podcasting to anybody because I think it's made me a better speaker. It's made me a better listener.
Hmm.
It's helped me articulate certain ideas. Again, the stakes are a little bit up when we're on the mics, and I think that really makes you, more thoughtful about things. It's very focused, so I just can't recommend it enough. I mean, you said you were doing it a few years ago, getting back into it, but it's just an awesome space, the
We did it
audio
with this
space.
was we did it pre-COVID, and we kind of backed off because it's really time consuming. I mean, to do it
Yes,
well,
yes,
you have the quality of your podcast, by the way, is very good. So I know I can appreciate the amount of work that and effort that you put into it. It's very hard to do. We weren't on video though. We were only
mm,
audio, and we're planning to go back into it, and we're going to be doing video as well. So
great,
um,
great.
that's big plans for 2025.
Well, I'm excited to speak to you further
Yes,
and
sir.
to take it back a notch.
Yes.
Reading a bit about you, I found it fascinating that perhaps your first encounter with, call it, meditation was at 6 years old.
Yeah,
How did
that's
that?
right.
How did that look at 6 years old? This discovery.
Well, it didn't look like meditation. I didn't know. I didn't know what it was. At the time, I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. The Bronx is, you may or may not be aware, is one of the five boroughs of New York City. There's the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and all that. And the Bronx is, there's nothing wrong with the Bronx, but per se, although it had a bit of a downfall, it's got a pretty bad reputation. But the area that we lived in was pretty good at the time. The problem was my family, really. I came from a broken family, and by broken, that's not a very popular way of describing a family because it's kind of negative. Let's just call it, that sort of graduated into being what they call a single parent home, without the benefit of a dad, without the benefit of a father. And without a father, my mother was left to her own devices. And this is very common. I mean, I don't know what your background is in your family, but it's not like this is unusual. There are plenty of people out there that come from single parent homes. And we didn't have dad around, and we had my mother. And not that she was anything wrong with my mother, but she tended to be a little emotional, and she was, I would say, impatient. And I had two younger sisters, and I resented not having a father around. I just resented it, and not having that paternal. We talk about paternity and maternity. There's a difference between a mom and a dad, and when one's missing, the other has to make up the difference. And sometimes they do that, and sometimes they don't do that so well. And my mom did the best she could. She really did. She actually did an amazing job, if you think about it. She always kept the roof over our head. We always had food on the table. It might not have been the best food all the time. A lot of macaroni and cheese and spam.
Quick meals. Yeah.
Quick meals, prepared foods. Potatoes and eggs. And so we had that, but she was really at a loss. She did the best she could do, and I resented it terribly. It was I didn't like not having a dad. I missed my father, and I felt different than all the other kids because I didn't know any other kids at that time who were missing a dad like I was. They all had fathers that came out and played stickball. I don't know if you know what stickball is. You're from Australia, right?
Yeah, we have a rounders, which may be similar. Is that where you hit the ball off the stick? Like it's like baseball, but you
Well,
hit it off the stick.
we use a broomstick. We would go
Okay.
out in the streets, and there were manhole covers in the streets that led down to the sewer,
Very New
into the sewer.
York.
Very New Yorky, and the each sewer would be a base. So you had first base, and then you would set up a second base, and it was like baseball. And we come out and you hit. You don't have a bat, you have a stick ball and a little pink rubber ball. Anyway, dads would come and help with that, and they took their families out, and they had money. We didn't have any money. They had station wagons and went on vacations and all of that stuff. And it was very, I wasn't envious. I really wasn't envious, but I felt different. And we were told, this is kind of a part that really took a toll on us, me and my younger sisters, is that we were told, I went to a Catholic school. It was a parochial school in the Bronx. And we had to tell the nuns and our friends that my mother had a boyfriend. And what happened was we had to tell them that he was our dad. And we had to lie. We were told to lie. And I just didn't like it. And I resented it. And I used to cry myself to sleep every night. I would just cry myself to sleep every night. And I would say, I always believe in God. Catholicism, we have a God. And I would pray to God. I would say, God, please, bring my mom and dad back together again. Bring my mom and dad back together again. And I got angry because it wasn't working. He wasn't answering me. He wasn't doing what I asked him to do. And it just didn't happen. I was a very curious kid, and it really came to a head, though. I mean, this is not an unusual story, though. I mean, kids have this all the time. But it came to a head at one point where I was a very curious kid, and I used to go through my mother's belongings, go through her dressers, when she was, I was the oldest, so I was in charge of watching my sisters. I would sort of babysit. And I don't know where my mother was this particular day, but I was home. I was probably 7 years old, 6 or 7. And I was going through her dresser, and I came across this file, and I didn't know what it was. I opened it up, and there was pages in it, I could read at 7 years old, pretty young. I could read. I couldn't read War and Peace, but I could, put sentences together. And I was reading this, and I'm looking at it, and it's like shocking what I'm reading. It's like a screenplay, And after you probably have read screenplays, it's like reading a play. There are characters and there's dialogue, and it goes back and forth, And the characters in it are my mother, my father, and I mentioned in it all as well. I'm in there, and this New York City police officer named Bernard, and I didn't understand what I was reading. They were talking about phone conversations, and there were mentions of sexual matters in there. It wasn't pornographic or anything like that, but it was. They talked about, I just picked up like sleeping together. What does that mean?
And it was in a screenplay format.
It was in a screenplay format because it was in a file, but I realized I used to watch a lot of TV at that time, and I watched dramas on TV. My mother used to put me to sleep with watching TV, and at that time in the States, there was a very popular show called Perry Mason. It was a you might have heard.
Yeah, I know,
detective
a detective show.
Detective, but no, he was an attorney. He was a lawyer.
Sorry, he was a lawyer, not a detective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I watched that. There was another show called The Defenders. They were my favorite shows because they showed people in, impressive people in suits and ties, and I realized from watching that what I was reading was not a storybook. It was a court transcript. This was my parents'
legal.
It was their divorce. Yeah, their divorce proceedings. And it was shocking because this was not TV. This was real. This was real. This was absolutely real. And then I mentioned my mother's boyfriend. Well, he moved into the house. The guy in this horror story moved into my house, and that really was very upsetting to me. I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. He wasn't my dad. And he was a drunk. He was a violent alcoholic. He would beat up my mother, and my mother would have. I would hear the screaming in the middle of the night, and I'd be shivering, and me and my sisters would be shivering in our beds at nighttime. And I know it sounds like a terrible horror story. I don't think it's all that unusual, to be honest with you. I know it's not because I work with a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts now, and it's quite common actually. And she would have black eyes and all that sort of thing. It was pretty terrible. When you're 6 or 7 years old, you're not supposed to be living in fear like that. You're supposed to be taught how to.
That's what I was going to say. I think as kids, we just want to feel safe, and when that security is not there, I think
it's not safe. That's right. It's not safe. Now, this sounds like a terrible sob story. I realize that. I don't want to overplay it. There's a silver lining to this, okay? And you had asked me about meditation. This is where that came into play. So I guess I was about 6 years old at the time, because you mentioned 6 years old. I used to always think it was 5 years old, but how could it be 5? It just sounds too young, but I was young. And I went to Catholic school, and I was told that I had to eat the lunch every day. And if I didn't eat the lunch every day, I would be in trouble. And sometimes I ate the lunch, and sometimes I didn't eat the lunch. They had, at that time in New York City, they had what they called the hot lunch program. And we weren't on welfare or anything like that, but we had assistance. And we would get a free hot lunch, and we had to eat it. And my mother felt guilty if I didn't eat it. And she also knew that we needed the nourishment. So she would say, you must eat it every day. And sometimes I did. But more often than not, it was horrible. It was terrible. If it was soup, it was cold. One time I cut into a fish stick. Those frozen little fish sticks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see you're making a face.
If it's fish, if it's even fish, they use fake crab or whatever it might be.
Oh, that could be. Well, who knows what they were using back then? It tasted fishy to me. But this one, I opened it up and I put it in my mouth, and the piece I was left, it had a worm in it. It
Oh,
was
jeez.
it was dead, but it was like one of
God.
those little green little like
Caterpillar
inchworms
type
was
whims.
yeah, it was in there. And I couldn't eat it. And so I wouldn't eat them. And the nuns came to one day. I was sitting there not eating anything, and then one of the nuns came up to me and she said, you have to eat your lunch, or your mother wants me to tell her if you don't eat the lunch, and you'll be in big trouble. I said, I'm sorry, sister, I can't eat it. I went home that day, and my mother asked me, as she usually did. She said, "Did you eat the lunch today?" And I cried. I said, I wouldn't lie. I said, first of all, I knew the nun would tell on me, but I wasn't. I didn't like lying. I said, "No, mommy, I didn't eat the lunch today." She said, "Well, you're going to be in big trouble." So she put me to bed as soon as I got home, and she said, "You're going to wait for Bernard, the cop. He's going to come home. He's going to punish you," which scared the hell out of me because he used to beat the crap out of my mother.
Mm.
And I was full of fear. And he came and he proceeded to do just that. He took out off his belt. I was laying in bed. I was on my belly, and he started whacking it. He gave me a whooping, as they say down south here. And here's where it happened. I was laying there in bed, and my eyes were closed, and I saw like little speckles of light inside of my head, like little everybody sees that. Everyone sees that. If you did it right now, you would see it. No, I'm not talking about, if you press here, I'm not talking about like the impressions that lights leave when you close your eyes and then they go away. When they go away, what there's left is little speckles of light. I saw them and I was looking at them, and I don't think it was unusual that I would see those. I kind of remembered seeing that even when I was younger. But what was unusual was that the lights seemed to come together inside of my head, and they formed like almost a light in the middle, and it got bigger and bigger and got bigger and bigger. People talk about um, seeing a light when they're dying.
Mm.
They move toward the light. They move toward the light. Well, I don't think he was killing me. That's not what this it was. But it was similar. It was a light, and I did move toward it, and I didn't know what it was. And on the other side of the light, there was. I could still see this in my head right now, by the way, as I recall.
It's
Every
very
time
vivid.
I've told this story many times, the memory is just so clear. There was clear blue sky on the other side, blue sky, and I feel like there was a little land mass also, but it was just there was a place. And on the other side of it, I sensed that there was a being, not a person, not a human. And I know I never thought it was God or Jesus or a saint or anything like that, or a dead relative, nothing like that. You hear those types of stories. I don't have a story like that. But it was definitely some sort of intelligence, and it didn't speak to me or anything like that, but I just felt its presence, and I knew everything's going to be okay.
Mm.
That's it.
So
Everything's going to be okay.
it was a warming presence. It
A
wasn't an
warming,
intimidating
a warming
guide.
presence. Yeah,
Yeah.
a warming presence, and it was not especially pleasurable or anything like
Mm.
that. It wasn't ecstasy or anything.
And there was a sense of safety there. Yeah.
Safety. You mentioned it before. We feel unsafe. This thing, this entity, uh, made me feel safe.
Mm.
And as soon as I felt safe, I pulled back, and the hole, like I'm in a cavern looking at outside the entrance to the cave, and it just sort of went away, and I was back in the room again, and he had finished beating me, and my mother was there, and she was crying, and I guess I had some big welts or something, and she was upset by it, and he said, "Don't worry about it, it'll be fine." And I looked at him, and I wasn't crying, and I said, and I no longer feared him. I didn't hate him. I didn't, some might say I forgave him. I just didn't feel anything for this man. I just felt like this is what he did and this is what happened, and I don't hate him. Which now I look at that and I would say I loved him.
Mm.
I don't love what he did. I didn't want to like what he did, but I didn't hate him. There was an absence of hate, and which is not to say that I became a saint, because I still
It
was
shaped
very
you. Mm.
Yeah, but it was just for this man at this moment, this time, I didn't hate him.
Mm.
But I was still quite upset with my mother,
Mhm.
you know, because she's the one that let this happen to me. She's the one that let him punish me, and she's the one that brought him into the house. So I didn't really forgive her for that. But I always harbored that resentment toward my mother growing up. Later on, I finally forgave her, but I always had that. And growing up, I
I was just going to say before, but I was just going to say it's really remarkable what the human spirit, no matter the age, does in the face of adversity. So this experience
right,
you had that put you into a safe space that allowed you to get through this horrendous thing that was going on is just
yeah.
it's
What is
just
the
quite
mechanism
remarkable. Yeah,
like
to cope.
what
It was a cope.
happens?
It's like a coping mechanism that's beyond logic, and but it got you through, and for you to then be able to sort of be in a place of I don't hate this person
This person, right?
regardless of what the vicious things this person is doing. That's at such a young age is remarkable in that it's enlightening. It's almost being enlightened in a way, in being able to love somebody who's your kind of
An enemy.
enemy or a perpetrator or an antagonist. So,
Yeah,
and there's nothing when you've described that, it doesn't sound, it doesn't sound kind of wacky. It's we all see these, I see these things you're talking about. It's
yeah,
almost like you see a galaxy when you close your eyes. There's a kind of infinite space there. So yeah, it's just very it's reassuring to hear that, because I just think remarkable things happen in the face of adversity, particularly so young.
yeah. And and I got through that. I went through that, and I've never hated him since then. He was in our lives for a considerable amount of time after that. But then growing up, I went through. I was still sort of an angry kid. I mean, I suppressed it. I put on a good show. I was always a good little Catholic boy, always behaving and yes, mommy, and
But the
I got fairly good.
resentment, yeah, the resentment was there. Yeah.
I suppressed it. The resentment was still there. The resentment was there, but I suppressed it. I acted the good part. But the pain doesn't go away. The
Mm.
pain doesn't go away. So, and isn't that's what happens with resentment. Resentment is being burned up, being sore, being angry, being um, irritated by things that you remember, or even that you don't remember. There's a lot of times we have unrecognized resentments. We don't even know why we feel uh, pain, and a lot of the times, and what is that really? What it comes down to is this is not, and I don't mean this in a religious sense because religions kind of use this word. I'm not about religion, but they have a word. Well, I used a religious word a moment ago, forgiveness, right? That's a religious word. They use that, but I forgave him. But another word would be judging,
Mm.
judging people, playing God. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's worthy? Who's unworthy? Who's going to heaven and who's going to hell? There are people that do that. Um, and that's playing God. Even if you don't believe in God, even if you don't believe that God exists, um, you're still playing the role. You're playing the role of a fictional character, I suppose it would be for you. And I believe that we have a spiritual. I'm a spiritual person, as you may have gathered. So I talk about the metaphysics of these ideas a lot, and I believe that we have a sort of a spiritual DNA that's built into us, sort of something that keeps us in line. We call it conscience, right?
Mm.
Conscience. It keeps us. We know when we're doing wrong. Something is telling us you're doing right, you're doing wrong. How to be virtuous, and we lose that virtue somehow. And when we're playing God, we're doing something that our conscience tells you, well, you're not God, and it hurts. It's painful. It's sort of like, what do you do with that pain? You put, if you had a hot stove and you put your hand on a hot stove, you're protected automatically. You pull your hand away because of the pain. It hurts. Well, if you were to hold it on, if you would find a way to keep it on there without the pain, you would just leave it on there, and you would damage your flesh, and your flesh would get infected, and you would die. Painlessly, you would die. Well, that's what alcoholics do. That's what drug addicts do. They take these things to assuage the pain of a guilty conscience for having played God or have violated this conscience that I talk about. Alcohol numbs. I took alcohol. I before I ever drank, though, I don't drink anymore. But before I drank, I used food. Food is also food that puts out the pain. Alcohol puts out the pain. Drugs put out the pain. Nicotine, cigarettes, that puts out the pain. These all have, we talk about nicotine is a powerful antidepressant chemical, or anything that causes the brain anything that accesses the pleasure centers of the brain and messes around with the dopamine and the norepinephrine and serotonin and GABA and whatever else is in there and whatever else they don't know that's in there. These are all things that make you feel better artificially. So alcohol, I feel better when I drink alcohol, but that's artificial. I'm not better. I just feel better. If I have trying to think of a jelly donut. Wow, that feels good eating that. And I became a chubby little kid as a result.
Different poison, same effect of escapism and numbing and trying to avoid the discomfort of whatever pain may be at the source of it.
Avoiding the discomfort, absolutely.
Yeah. And you touched on guilt and resentment. These are big things, and I just think when this developmental stuff happens at a pivotal age, as it did in your case, as kids, the tendency is for us to blame ourselves. We sort of see our parents as kind of infallible superheroes, and so we're like, well, it can't be their fault, and maybe subconsciously we blame ourselves. But then when we carry that, as you say, we carry that through, and it starts to manifest in these toxic behaviors. That could be, it can take on a life of its own until we start to address the core stuff. So how?
And if you blame yourself, what is that? That's depression. You're blaming yourself. Yeah, I think you're 100% correct. 100% correct.
So you were shifting. You were sort of shifting between different, whether it was food or alcohol. It was all doing the same thing, which was trying to escape and numb this pain that you've talked about.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct. And the pain for judging my mother, and also judging myself because I was depressed. I was. Well, interestingly, I had another experience like that when I was in my late teens. I was already drinking all the time throughout my high school years. I was smoking cigarettes and drinking. I was the little street punk in the Bronx. And the first time I ever got drunk was I think I was in the 8th grade. I was only probably about 12, 13 years old. And I got violently sick, and it was a blackout drunk, and I almost fell off the roof of an apartment building. And I don't remember it, but people tell me that I had an encounter with the police. It was horrendous. I had puked all over the place. I was vomiting, violently ill. And the next day, I looked at how bad it was, and the only thing I can think of is, man, I cannot wait to do that again. I can't wait.
Not to bring it
worked.
Back. Yeah, not to bring it back to me too much, but I had a similar experience. But at 18, when I discovered alcohol, my stepmother describes it as like it was literally like I hit a switch. And similar to you, there was a lot of suppressed stuff there. So the first time I discovered alcohol, it was like it was like a release of all that stuff that I'd been. Because if you can't do it for yourself, the alcohol suddenly relaxes you. And so of course it's like, wow. But it was the same. I downed an entire bottle of vodka and ended up like, sick in bed for 3 days. And then when I recovered, I was like, what's happening next weekend? Let's
Yeah, right. And it's like, and while you're drinking it, it's like, wow, this feels better. They have in recovery circles that you hear the expression, insanity is what? How does it go? Insanity,
doing the same thing over and expecting
expecting a different result. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that is very far from defining insanity. That's one of the things that insane people do. But for somebody such as myself, who I later became an alcoholic, and no, I drank the alcohol over and over again because it did exactly what I knew it was going to do. It made me feel better. It was only temporary, but it made me feel better, and it was always worth it. It was always worth it, and I always returned to it, I don't know what your drinking habits became, but
no, mine, I mean, in Australia, we kind of drank like the world was ending when we were young, and it was a
yeah,
very, the kind of like we just drank very, I think the youth of today perhaps have a better understanding around it. But for us, we were literally just, for me, it looked like I was very disciplined and determined in the week. And on the weekends, I would blow myself out of a cannon. Like, so
yeah,
it was very much the
yeah.
binge drinking thing, which is common in Australia, Britain, America, and many places. But yeah, it was much more, which I've heard is potentially worse because you're kind of smashing it, and then it's a bit. I think if you're having a bottle of wine every night, it's still bad, but
Yeah.
it's more regular thing as opposed to
Well,
just
also you're not at your best, and you're interacting with the world, and you're going to work, and you have a career, and you're trying to raise a family, you're trying to have relationships, and you're not bringing the best you into each situation. So you're affecting people in not such a good way. You might be able to affect them better.
so without using a cliche. I know you went on to work in finance on Wall
Yes,
Street.
I did.
Wall Street's not a world I know, but from what I understand of it. I imagine the movies are a little cliche and so on, but that's kind of a work hard, play hard environment, I
Yeah.
imagine, as in, yeah, it's very high energy in the day and so on. But did you have what you would call sort of a bottom or a rock bottom?
It was sort of mental. It wasn't really. I never lived on the street or anything like that. I was a functional alcoholic. You would call not. I don't think I was functioning very well, but looking out from the outside, I had a job and I had some income and all that sort of stuff. So by the time I got to Wall Street, I went to Wall Street pretty late. That was not my original career. I'd gone into some other businesses, and I did a lot of what you would call a lot of pivoting here
Mm.
and there.
Same,
As th
same.
Yeah, I went into the fruit and vegetable business. Went into this business and that business, and it was a series of things. And some of them worked out pretty well. And I kind of, but I got bored easily and would pivot to something else and pivot to something else. And the final pivot brought me, well, I guess I pivoted out of Wall Street too eventually. But when I pivoted into Wall Street, it was on the heels of having lost a lot of money. You know, that was my low point because money and power and all that sort of thing was, I wanted to accomplish things. I was very, very ambitious. I became very ambitious, especially in my drinking, with my drinking. Being an ambitious alcoholic is very frustrating because you just
Yes.
can't get quite going.
Yeah.
And I lost a lot of money. I had an investor who put some money into a business that I was running, and I found out that the money was tied to the mob. He was laundering money through my business, and I had put up a couple of houses that I owned, and I I was shocked. I just couldn't enjoy the business anymore. I said, "This is dirty money. I can't.
Mm.
I have to get out." And I was starting to get strong armed, and it was, you know,
Wow. It's where it's a
violence
slippery
was
slope, a slippery slope.
slippery slope. Physical violence was threatened on me, and I said, "Okay, I'm getting out of here." And it occurred to me, like, I was $300,000 in debt, which it took me a long time to pay. I paid it all off, but eventually it took me 20 years, but I paid it off, almost 20 years. Um, and I didn't know what to do, so I figured, well, let me go to Wall Street out of the clear blue sky. and I went and I got licensed and I signed up with a firm and they sponsored me and I became a stockbroker. And the firm that I wound up with was it wasn't a very good firm. It was they were not on the up and up. Well, put it this way, some of the brokers there were really, they were crooks. They were basically stealing money from not stealing money directly, but they were making promises to clients that they couldn't keep. They were making price and time projections for stocks to go up and things like that, providing what I felt was phony research. They made a movie about us, as a matter of fact. They made a movie about the firm. The name of the company was J.T. Moran, and they made a movie called Boiler Room. If you've ever, you can see it, you can rent it, and that movie, I never watched that movie because I watched it about 10 years later, but I couldn't bear to look at it because
Too close to
I
the
knew.
bone. Mm.
And when I watched it, I cried. I cried. I went, I can't believe I was a part of this. I can't believe I was a part
Was
of
it a doco or a feature film? Was it
Oh no, it was a
drama?
yeah. Oh yeah, it was drama.
Narrative.
It was
Yeah.
quite. Yeah, it had Ben Affleck was in it, and
Yeah.
some big names were in it. Big actors. They weren't that big then, but well, I guess but they became big. I can't think of the other names, but they're household words. I'm just not good at that sort of thing. And yeah, that firm. Now, I didn't find myself able to fit in quite with that, but I became a good salesman and I became a good sales trainer, and I would train people how to sell stocks and things like that. And there was another fellow that finally the authorities just shut down the firm, because they were just too wild. It was like just too wild, And we were in the pet newspapers. We were all over the place, and I just didn't want to be affiliated with that anymore. And another fellow in the firm left also. We all left because at the end of I will say this about the film: everything in that film is 100% on the money except for the last part. The last part of the film, it closes with a prison bus driving up to the office building as if they're going to put everybody in shackles and throw them into prison. That never happened. Nobody went to jail but they got thrown out of the industry. They got thrown out of the business. I did not get thrown out of the business. My license was totally clean. I never did any of that stuff. And I was actually relieved when they closed because that was all around us. And there was another fellow there who opened up a legitimate firm down on Wall Street. He wanted to know if I wanted to be a part of it. So I went down there and I joined that firm. And I became a vice president of mergers and acquisitions, and I did deals. I wasn't a stockbroker really anymore. I was more of a deal maker, and I would raise capital for other firms. And that was okay, but I never really took that to where I should have either. You can't give your all if you're drinking.
Mm.
You can't.
Mm.
It just,
You're
hung
thin.
under.
Yeah.
You're spread thin. Exactly. It's just not giving your all. I went back after I stopped drinking and that firm was gone. I went back to my partner at the time and I said, I apologize. I could have advised you a lot better, and I could have worked a lot harder, and we might still be in business right now if it were not for me.
It resonated what you said about it's tough being an ambitious drunk, an ambitious alcoholic, because it's just hindering all levels of kind of focus and like you say, narrowing that focus and giving your all, which is essentially like what you perhaps want to do, but it just hinders you. It keeps you chasing your tail, in a way.
You're not a full person. You're not operating at peak capacity, And I, at that point, I was drinking at least once a week, getting drunk and all that stuff. And I came home one night. This is when I finally stopped, by the way. This is when I stopped. And I came home. I wasn't falling down drunk or anything, but my wife knew that I had been drinking, and she said, "You gotta stop this. You gotta stop this. We can't do this anymore." And I said, "Look, I promise I will not drink for the rest of the week." For the rest of the week.
All steps. Yeah.
Well, I made it 3 days. And finally I came home, after 3 days. So I was a 3-day guy. I'd feel pretty good on the third day. By the third day, the withdrawal had taken place and I was back on top of things. But that 3 days was lost, And she said, I came home at like 5:30 in the morning, and she was sitting on the couch crying. And she said, why do you do this? You did it again. You've been doing this for years. Why do you do this? And I said, the truth. I said, I don't know, because I didn't know. I had no idea. I had no idea about the things that I look back on and realize now, you know? And she said, well, you got to do something. So I said, look, she knew my history with meditation, consciousness, and I had been coming. It was always start, stop, stop, start, stop. All of our married life, where I would stop meditating or stop practicing. It's not about the meditation. It's about what happens when you meditate. You become conscious. So it was. I stopped that practice, and whenever I stopped it, I would start drinking and smoking, and things would fall apart again. So I said, look, I'm going to start meditating again, because I hadn't for a couple of years. She said, good. She knew what that meant. That meant that things were going to change. But she wasn't fully satisfied. She said, what else are you going to do? And I went, oh no, what does she want me to, she wants me to go into rehab? What does she want me to do? You know? So I came up with, I told her, look, I will call AA, and I will try the 12-step solution. I didn't know anything about it or anything like that. And I did. I tried it, and it was good. And I had that experience. I went through the 12 steps and did all that stuff. I'm not a member of AA today. I could be if I wanted to, because you have to be as an alcoholic to be a member. But I did count myself as a member for a while. But then I wrote a book, and I put myself out there. And AA has a tradition that you can't, you're not allowed to have your face and your last name in the public eye, in media, and call yourself a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're not allowed to do that. So in deference to that fellowship, and I wasn't going to meetings, I still go to, if I'm invited to speak at an AA or a 12-step, doesn't have to be AA, but a 12-step event or a recovery event of some kind, which invariably there are a lot of people from AA there. I will do that. I've done conferences, and I do step workshops and things like that. I take people through those steps who want to. People who don't want to, I don't. Because the 12-step recovery approach is really interesting. The first thing they do is they go for those resentments right away. That's the first thing they do.
Off out of the gate, yeah.
Right out of the gate. They go straight for the jugular. They go, you have to find and face the truth about yourself, and you are a resentful, hateful son of a you-know-what. And that's what they go. They prepare you spiritually. You know, they have admitting, they have all that stuff. But once they get there, the first thing they do is you do an inventory, and a lot of people like that. But ultimately, you have to get up to the point where you're praying and meditating. That's their 11th step, right before their 12th step. And their 12th step is where you start virtue in all your affairs, you know. So some people don't want to go through that process, so we go straight to, I don't tell them it's step 11, because it's not step 11, it's meditation. I teach them how to meditate. And a lot of them don't have to go through all that process, but some people want to go through it. The good thing is I know how to do that. And then I started working with I stopped drinking at that time, and then I started working with, I moved away from New York and came up to Cape Cod. I don't live in New York anymore. I don't know if you know that.
No, I know you're in Cape Cod. Yeah, Massachusetts.
I'm in lovely Cape Cod. I don't know if you're familiar with Cape Cod. Cape Cod is
Never been to the States, but I meant, yeah.
Well, when you come, I won't buy you a drink, but
I appreciate
I'll buy you a sandwich. Buy you a sandwich.
That. Yeah.
It's a resort community. A lovely resort community. The Kennedys live here and all of that sort of thing. And it's sort of like a vacation land for New Yorkers, basically. So I came here, and I moved here, and I lived and I lived here, and I started a life here, raised my kids here, and free of alcohol. And I started an online presence. This is before Facebook. This is back, there were Google, Yahoo groups. I don't know if you're old enough to remember those, but there are all these different, you are probably.
Yeah.
And I had an online presence working with alcoholics, not necessarily 12 steps, but you know, if you're in recovery, you run into 12-step people all the time. And I speak their language. I know all about it. And I started to show them meditation. I started to take my meditation. I made we give out CDs to people who would meet. People would come here to the Cape from all over, mostly just Northeast really, but they would come from Pennsylvania and Boston, New York, and I would take them through some who wanted to go through the steps. I would take them through the steps, but I always come to the meditation. I would make these CDs and distribute it to them, the guided format that I used. And of course, it was more personal than what I have now. It was like, hi, Sarah, close
Awesome.
your eyes,
Awesome.
sit down. Yeah. So somewhere there are those floating around, I don't know. They're the same meditation. It's the same thing. They're just a little bit more personal.
That's very gracious of you to make them personal. Like that's showing that you really care.
Well, I would show them how to do it in person, but I can't.
Mm.
They don't have access to me. Sometimes people would call me on the phone. I would take them through it over the phone a lot. But you have to be on your own. You can't rely on me. I don't want anybody. The last thing I want to be is someone's guru.
Independent. Get people self-sustainable. Yeah.
Get self-sustainable. Get them connected with. These are people who want a connection with God, or what they call God. In AA they start with it. You know how that works. I believe it's kind of
roundabout. Yeah.
Famous.
Roundabout.
They start with a higher power, and then they turn it over to God and all that. But that's what I did, and then I transformed it into a more generic version that I put online that they could just stream off of. I put on by that time YouTube had started up, and then after a while, Steve Jobs came along, and with his smartphone and app stores, and I said, "Oh my goodness, I can put this meditation on an app." But I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to do it. I can't write code. I'm too old to write code. Not really. There are plenty of people my age do. But I can't write code. I don't know, very little. I mean, I did some basic stuff, to set up web pages and things like that. But I didn't know how to do it. And my son, who, by the way, I raised my son, my son and my daughter. My wife practices what I call non-contemplative meditation. That's the name that I've given it. I haven't invented meditation. I simply have given a name to this particular kind.
That's what I'm curious about is the non-contemplative aspect.
Yeah,
because
aspect of it, yeah.
Because, I heard an interesting thing, like meditation is not necessarily my understanding of it, and from my experiences with it, it's not a passive thing, it's an active thing. But this contemplative, non-contemplative.
Yeah.
From what I perhaps sense is that about allowing things to come to you in that state, or is it?
Yeah. That's
no
part of it.
It's the non part, the non-contemplative.
The non part. I know. I had to come up with a name for it because I had written a book. I wrote a couple of books. I wrote one about 15 years ago, and then 10 years ago I wrote another book. And I said, well, I need a name for this because it's not the same meditation that people are doing. People are, when I say people, I mean the type of meditation that goes more toward the Eastern traditions, Buddhism and Hinduism, and also a lot of New Age stuff. There's a lot of non-duality involved in it, and I'm not a non-duality type person. I don't believe that we're all God. I believe that that sort of thinking is like, okay, you're in pain and you're not doing so well in life because you're actually God and you don't know it. Once you realize that you're God, you'll be okay. It kind of has that feel to it. Whereas, no, because I had a Catholic upbringing too, so I feel like, well, maybe that's kind of the truth. That God, not that they were so great at articulating it all the time, but there is a God and I'm not him. And all the times that I thought I was, that's when I got in trouble. That's when I felt the pain. That's when I felt that, that pain in my to take my hand off the burning stove and didn't do it. So the idea was I needed a name for the type of meditation that I was doing, which would be different than that. They do a lot of contemplating. They do a lot of visualizing. They do a lot of mantra, breathing, and all that. The non-contemplative meditation is absolutely none of that. Absolutely none of it. It's all stripped out. You do not, all of those things I see as the type of activity that actually goes to doing the same things that alcohol and food and sex, and it's stimulating those. It accesses the nucleus accumbens section of the brain and goes into the pleasure center and messes with your neurotransmitters, and you feel good. A lot of people, that's what they want. You know, I
Mm.
would never talk. I would never try to talk anybody. I never try to talk anybody out of what they're doing. Um, that's what they do. That's what they want. That's what they get because they do feel better. There's no doubt about it. When you do those types of meditations, you create that white noise in your head and or droning sound or music or sound effects. You know, raindrops or waves crashing, whatever. It's very relaxing. It really is. But you're not relaxed. You're still the same agitated SOB you were when you sat down, but you feel better now.
Mm.
You haven't changed. You haven't changed. You've only done that. So what non-contemplative meditation does is, we talk about resentment. How does that resentment get into you? How do you become resentful and start that playing God scenario inside of you? It comes through thoughts. It's always through thinking. It's always through thoughts. These thoughts come wherever they come from. They come over the horizon, and then and there's your intellect generates the thoughts, and it's always that judgment, that God playing stuff that I talked about. When you separate from the thoughts, you no longer play God. You're not doing it anymore. Now, I don't mean suppress thought. I don't mean that. You don't want to go silent.
You mean
That's not
being more of an observer?
an observer. An observer. Okay. And when you're an observer, the trick is to be, we use the word trick, but the idea is to become an observer of thought, not to suppress thought, good thoughts, bad thoughts, any kind of thought at all, and don't have a judgment on it.
Without
Don't judge
judgment.
yourself.
Yep.
Without judgment. And that without judgment part is automatic. You can't just say, I'm not judging. It's automatic when you're separated from the thoughts. You become totally objective. Not even an opinion.
Mm.
Not even an opinion.
You're purely
So let's say
observing. Yep.
truly observing without even forming an opinion. Not even an opinion on the meditation, what you're doing is good or bad, just stepping back and watching. And that means not visualizing. But a lot of people they feel better if they have platitudes and they repeat platitudes, the old, um, the
A-
old everybody, every day in every way I'm getting better and better,
affirmation type stuff. Yeah.
affirmations. There's nothing wrong with the concept of the affirmation. It's just that's you're self-hypnotizing yourself. It's not real. It's artificial and it doesn't last and you get addicted to it. That's why people get addicted to some types of meditation. Non-contemplative meditation is the anti-addiction. You do not get addicted to it. It's always fresh. It's always new. It's always you approach it like you've never done it before. And it always has the same effect if you're doing it right. If you start to contemplate, that's why I call it non-contemplative, because you're not thinking about anything. You're watching the thoughts as they come and then nothing more. I realize, I have no interest in the other types of meditation, but I've had to look at them because I have this and people ask me questions about it. So I realize that they also have language that also says, don't be judgmental, watch thoughts without judgment. It's the same type of thing. But it always comes down to, at some point, a concentration. You're concentrating on something. And what I'm saying is, watch without thoughts, watch without judgment, and that's it. Do nothing else. Don't do anything else. Resist that temptation. It's not easy. It's not
No,
easy.
it's a very minimalist approach to something that's kind of supposed to be very minimalist in a way. Like
It's simpler
it's
than even
simple
the
and
simplest.
well, that's the beauty of from what you're saying is
Yeah.
it's a very simple approach to something that can get a little bit perhaps more complicated than it needs to be, but is also not easy, as you've just said.
It's simple, but you see, that's the thing. We are the ones that make it complicated.
We
And that's
complicate it
why
with it.
we complicate it. And then because we complicate it, then we start wrapping around it dogma and
Mm.
and rules and we're this, we're that. Before you know it, you've got a meditation cult or a or something.
I think what you said earlier, when I'm trying to meditate, I'm judging. I'm like, am I doing good or bad? Or, and if
Yeah.
and often if I nod off, it's like, well, you fell asleep, so you kind of failed, but perhaps but
You fell asleep when you were meditating, you fell asleep?
often when I try to meditate, it ends in
Yeah,
me not nodding off. Like I go
that
into just
happens.
yeah.
Yeah, you don't want
But
that to happen.
no, and like you're saying, it's actually a concentrated thing, but the simplicity of your technique
Yes,
um is quite cool. Do you think it in its essence it goes back to that experience that you had as a kid?
I do. I know that it does. It goes back exactly to that because I didn't know what to do with that experience. And because I didn't know what to do with it, I did nothing with it. So when I practice it now, and I've been practicing it for, I told you that I've fallen away from it, but my experience with this is nearly 50 years. I
Mm,
don't I'm 67 years old.
mm.
And
You're a young 67.
I'm a young 67. Yeah, I hope so. And people have said, well, you drank in your younger years, so you're pickled.
I've used that.
You've been
You've
pickled.
been pickled.
No, I haven't had a drink in almost 30 years. So but I've been doing this and teaching people how to do it for a long time. Um, I'm sorry. What was your question?
No, just in its essence, it feels like it goes back to that experience
Oh,
that
yes, it
you
does go
had.
back to that. Absolutely, because I didn't know what those lights were, and those lights are people you've heard the ancient mystics, you've read various uh, transcripts and wherever it comes from, literature. They talk about see the light. I see the light. Well, that's real. There really is light. That's real. When you close your eyes and you see those little speckles, that's not your imagination. That's not physiological. That's there is that. You can stimulate the rods and cones until they excite them, and you can see little sparks. Inside of your head. I'm talking about something beyond that. There's something that comes in little patterns of light form. That is the inner light. We actually have an inner light with us that we're born with. And the problem is that so many of us are born into environments and we meet the injustices and the cruelties of the world, just like I did. You're a human being. You have those in your background too, in your story somewhere. Everybody does. And we get resentful and that those lights start to go out. We don't see
Dim.
them anymore,
Mm.
you know?
They dim. Yep.
And yeah, and the idea of, and it's important to one of the things I learned was to extend that energy inside of your head into the rest of your body. And the most sensitive areas are the fingertips. So we do it like this. And some people don't like that because it looks like they're praying. Maybe they are. I don't know. But we have these paintings and of people who observe saints doing this. I don't know what a saint is, but it's probably not a perfect human being, but it's probably somebody. Maybe I've always looked at it as maybe someone who learned how to do this.
Mm.
Because you would see, because when you meditate, the way I teach it, you feel warmth in your forehead and in your hands, and it kind of glows around you. And
It's interesting
there's some,
the hands thing
yeah.
because I naturally do an exercise where I tap my fingers
Oh,
one by
yeah,
one,
yeah, yeah.
and that's just something that I've naturally
That's
but
really interesting.
what you're saying is fascinating because again, coming back to that judgment when we see images, it's labeled as prayer or whatever it may be. But when you think about
Right.
the sensitivity of the fingers and it makes sense to bring it to there.
It
So in a
bring it
way,
brings it. Yeah, and your fingertips are very sensitive, so you can
yeah,
feel. That's why we use it. I mean, you could do it if you could do the tip of your nose too, if
yeah. But
But
it seems in the technique that so perhaps it's about this observation of thoughts, but also tapping into this kind of light aspect through the body at the same time.
correct,
Yeah,
correct.
which is very
It is a
cool.
real. There is a real energy,
Yeah.
and people have tried to put names on it as to what that is. Um, I can't think offhand of what some people like. And I was raised a Catholic, so they call that God's grace. The uh, state of grace when you are filled with God, the will of their God, what they call God. I have no idea what God looks like. They seem to know. I don't know, but
So
I feel that he comes that way. Yes.
So the C app that you've developed, does that offer specific timing increments, or is it
Yeah,
tailored to? Yeah.
it does, because you don't need a lot of it. Non-contemplative meditation is not, it's not, there's nothing trancy about it. You're not putting yourself into a trance. Um, you're not inebriating yourself with thoughts or feelings or anything like that. You're separating from that. So you don't want to do it too much, because if you do too much, you can wind up hypnotizing yourself. You really can. I never recommend anyone doing it more than 5, 10, or 15 minutes at a time, and never more than twice a day. If you sit there, yeah, less is better.
Mm.
Less is better. The more centered you become in your life, the more you start bringing conscious awareness into your life, the less time it takes for you to return to that. You're just practicing something that you need to carry into your everyday life anyway. The ability to step back and watch and be objective and not be overrun with emotions. Because if you are, people will control you.
Mm.
Because I said, I mentioned that everything comes in thoughts. Well, the people, advertisers, politicians,
Jump on that.
yeah, they upset you, and they give you thoughts, and they give you thinking. Before you know it, they're controlling you. You step back and they lose that. They lose control. You're now looking at things objectively. And yeah.
It's also the stories we tell ourselves, right? Like myself as a storyteller, I've always been a pro at telling myself stories.
Telling
And
yourself stories.
yes, telling myself, well, creating stories and narratives in my head that don't serve me necessarily, So I've had to
Right.
change. Through the observation, I've had to work at changing those stories in the past, that.
But if you change the stories, the idea is to step back and, this is from my perspective now, step back and look at the stories. Don't change the stories. Just step back and look at them. Just say, hey, that's a story that was created. What a lot of people do, they make the mistake, say, well, I don't like that story. That story makes me feel bad. Let me rewrite a new story that makes me feel good. Well, you're still lost in thought. You're unconscious. You're not conscious. You just have a better story. One that
You're
like
saying
more.
Observe the story for what it is without judgment. Observe it, just
without judgment.
Step back from it. Yeah,
just step back.
It's very cool your technique, because I think it's easy to perhaps throw meditation into one bucket, but there's no reason why there cannot be different, and there obviously is so many different styles and techniques. But
sure,
what's cool about yours is the simplicity of something that's supposed to be very simple, but like I said earlier, can get a little overcomplicated with our kind of tyrant nature of thinking. So I'm definitely
you get it. I can hear that you get it. You understand. I thought might have to over-explain this to you, but you seem to get
it's
it.
just I get it. It just sometimes it takes me a bit, but no, I think but I think it's very practical and in its approach, so it's not you're suggesting big things, but it's also very much sort of in the pocket, which is
it's something we already have. We already have this ability, and it's something you can just do,
Yeah. No, I would definitely like to try it. Do you find in the technique that although you're observing the thoughts, do you find that things come to you that are important?
You mean in the way of information?
Yeah, if you're perhaps trying to make a decision, or you're stuck on something.
Oh, I see.
When you get into that state, do you then find that call them answers, do things come through?
It's funny because the answer is yes, but it's not the way someone might hope. They might hope, well, I'm going to meditate. You hear people say, I'm going to meditate on that. I'm going to meditate on that.
Well, I say that. I've said that.
I'm sorry.
No apologies.
You need to stop. Well, let me tell you what happens when the intention is good, but when you do that, you're being ambitious. You're going to, something, your intellect will kick in and give you an answer that maybe is not the right answer. Okay. When you are awake, truly conscious, and truly aware, like, for instance, right now, I'm awake right now. I'm conscious right now speaking to you. Okay. I don't know what I'm going to say next. I have no idea. In fact, I thought I knew a moment ago until I started explaining this to you, but now I don't know what I was going to say. So what I will say is, um, what I will say is, when you're conscious, you don't have to make decisions.
Mm.
You give up decision making. I don't even like the word decision, but I need a word like decision. So in speaking to somebody and speaking to people, I have to come up with something. You make choices. You make better choices. You say, well, that's a decision. No, because a decision is something that you've premeditated and you've thought of ahead of time, and you may not be making the right one. A choice is something you just make at this right in the moment. It happens then, now, in the present. You don't have to premeditate it. You remember there was a good example. I use it all the time. Is I show my age, unfortunately, when I use some of these examples. But you know Michael Jackson, right?
Of
Michael
course.
Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everybody knows him. So he had a video a long time ago uh, for a song that he did, Billie Jean. You know the song Billie
I
Jean
know it.
that he's
I
in?
know the video. Yeah.
Oh, you know
Michael
the video?
Jack.
Okay.
Yeah. He was the first concert I ever saw, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was quite,
Okay.
as a kid, it was quite, yeah, it was to see the first concert, the kind of epic stage show that it was. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've
But I
never seen
remember
him,
that. I
but
remember the video, the Billie Jean video.
okay. So look at the video. I haven't seen it in a long time, but as I remember it, he's on a pathway of some kind and he's dancing. You know, he's got his hat and whatever. You know, and he's being Michael Jackson, this fabulous dancer, spinning around and he's stepping and following a pathway. And every time he puts his foot down on the path, it lights up.
Mm.
And I believe it lights up a different color. I'd have to look at the video again, but it lights up, it lights up, it lights up, and it keeps moving along the path, and he's going forward, and he keeps going, keeps going. What he doesn't do is wait to see if it worked.
Mm.
Like you know, he wouldn't be able to dance. He wouldn't be able he wouldn't be as graceful. He wouldn't move with grace. He'd be hesitant, and he'd make mistakes. He'd probably fall off the path. And then and if you think of that as an analogy to life, you just go one step at a time and you trust, you have faith that it's going to be okay. And like Michael, it is okay. And if he were to look back at the path, he would see the path had been lighting up all along, all along.
Mm.
And if we live the same way in the moment, moment by moment, it's been this way for me. I just look and I look at the back for a moment and I say, wow, all of the dots have been connecting all along. I didn't even know it. I didn't even know it was happening. And all of the dots that I thought were horrible at the time,
Were gifts or
yeah, somehow something that's bad turned out to be good,
in
you know,
hindsight. Yeah, you see it
in
in hindsight.
hindsight. And it's not good to stare there because I still have to go forward,
Keep moving.
but
Yeah.
keep moving. But you know, that's just the way it happens. You just keep moving forward and everything seems to work out okay. And there are all sorts of uh, spiritual platitudes and concepts that address that. But when it's actually happening to you, it's different than just running it through your head. You know, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. You know,
There's yeah, you're exercising the intuition there, the intuitive.
intuition,
It's
intuition.
intuition.
That's
Intuition, which I'm call it an advocate for, but I yeah, that element of just trusting in choice based on this intuitive from an intuitive place.
and
Again,
everyone has an
mm,
intuition. The problem is we listen. There, you know, there's a difference between intuition and instinct.
mm,
Intuition, by my way of thinking, intuition comes from God, and instinct comes, sorry, instinct comes more from the animal side or more
the
biological
survival,
side.
the
Survival,
survival primal kind of instinct, whereas the
correct,
intuitive voice is
correct.
something greater coming through you.
Eating and sexing and because that's what we do. We
Survival
reproduce.
stuff. Yep.
Yeah, survival stuff. Food,
Yep.
food and sex,
Yeah.
which happen to be
You've summed it up nicely because I've tried to define the difference between instinct and intuition because people are like follow your gut, but that's actually essentially like follow your instincts and your intuition.
it could be instinct.
Could
Yeah,
be instinct, but intuition. But yeah,
yeah.
the trust thing I find challenging, but it does prove itself, like you say it does prove itself. when
It's scary.
it's scary to just trust and allow yourself to just fall in a way into something with a knowing that it's okay. But yeah, that hindsight stuff is crazy when you look at the stuff that happened in the past and how that had to happen in a way. And, all that stuff's led me to Germany and why I'm here. And I often think of those sliding door moments. I went to London in a rock band from Australia, but there was a moment in London where if I hadn't gotten in the taxi, I wouldn't have ended up in Germany, But you can trace
Yeah.
that back. You can trace those sliding door moments to any day of the week.
And
But
you
yeah,
didn't know that was going to happen when you got into the taxi. You
no,
just
I
got
was
in the
merely
taxi.
I was making a choice. I was making a choice, and those choices have led me to where I am. But that hindsight is a beautiful thing, especially when you've had, the things that have happened in your life and so on. That we've all had these, often traumatic experiences, and that they've led us to where we are. And the fact that you're doing this work and that you've gone back to that experience as a kid and that you've been offering it for a long time is an amazing thing.
Well, yeah, and putting it in the app makes it very easy. You had asked me about time segments, and yeah, when in the app it's just real simple. I try to keep the app as simple as possible so people don't have to go. There are a lot of meditation apps out there, and they're basic. We could have done that. We didn't. We keep it just to the one meditation. That's all it works as far as I'm concerned. Those others are they curate methods and teachers and everything from all over the place, and you have to search. Our app is just the C app. There's one thing, one meditation. That's it, and you tap it once, and you're doing it.
So is it available in all countries and on all the app stores?
It is. It's available. Yeah, it's available. It's in Apple and
it's
available
SEE
for
as in
iPhone
C.
and SEC as in C.
Yep.
Not C as an ocean. It's my site, if anybody wants to go to, is thecapp.com. Thecapp.com. SEE, yes.
Cool. And where can people find you? It's on the same.
Find me. Well, you can Google. Nobody's going to remember my last name because it's too hard to spell and it's too hard to pronounce.
It's actually German.
It's German. Yes, it is German. And guess we didn't get into it. I haven't got a drop of German blood in me.
Well,
think about it. The cop. You want to hear something? Here's the wrap up. We don't have to wrap it up now, but here's the funny thing. I told you that I forgave the cop. I only found out about 2 years ago that the cop who I forgave when I was 6 years old is my dad.
Really?
I had a Luke Skywalker moment.
That is very much a Luke Skywalker moment, and you found that out in later life.
Yeah, the bad guy is the evil guy in my life was my father.
Wow. And how did you take that when you found that out?
I was shocked.
Yeah, that's the rug out. The rug's pulled out from beneath.
Yeah, it was shocking. I just found it out. And thanks to 23andMe, and someone contacted me and wanted to know, I'm Irish. Why is and I'm related to you according to 23andMe. Why is your name Schwarzhoff? I'm not German. And the guy that my mother originally married was German, And she sent me a picture. She was a public school principal in the Bronx, oddly enough. And she sent me a picture of her grandparents. And those were Bernard's parents. And according to the DNA, those are also my grandparents.
That's wild.
And,
yeah.
This
is families. Yeah. This is the complexity of families and
unbelievable. And I've been in contact now with half brothers and sisters and cousins that didn't know they existed. So my name is not supposed to be Schwarzhoff. It's supposed to be Doherty.
Right.
I wondered why, on my genealogy, on my genetics said I'm 100% Irish.
Yeah.
And actually 80% Irish, and the rest is English and Scottish.
There's a heck of a lot of that going on now with these tests, I think, that are revealing family kind of secrets. now that people are have this ability to trace DNA. You know, I found out I'm 42% Scottish,
You
which
didn't know.
well, I did, but I didn't know to that extent. Like that's quite high, 42%. You know, I
And
mean, I
that's a
was
lot. You're very Scottish.
very Scottish. You know,
Oh
and
yeah.
I was born in England, but yeah, I found out the 42% Scottish thing. Yeah, I think it's revealing a lot of not just people's makeup, but stuff that's gone down in family histories, like in your case.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. So
I was going to say on the name, because you and I are both essentially Daniels. I'm interested in, because I was always a Danny, and I still am to friends and family.
sure,
But
me too.
the more I've found, the more I've got very clear about sort of I've had a lot of reinvention and pivoting as well. But the closer I've got to the sort of core and truth of who I am, I've gone back to that Daniel name, mainly professionally. I never used to use it, but that's why I use it creatively and professionally, and I really like it because I was named after an Elton John song, and so I've
Oh yeah,
embraced.
sure.
You know, Daniel was always when I was in trouble as a kid, so it had a bad tone around it because the teacher would be like Daniel. Um, but now I've actually sort of gone back to that, so I don't know if
Good. Daniel, my brother. Daniel, my brother, you are older than me or something. I forgot how that goes.
well,
That Elton John
there's
song. You know what
yeah.
Daniel means. You know what the name means in Hebrew, don't you?
No, I'm vaguely aware of the lion's den thing, but in Hebrew, what's the Hebrew? No, I don't.
Daniel means judge.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Judge. Wow. As in,
Yeah.
as in judgment, or as in just the word judge?
I don't know, but I always felt that maybe it just meant that I'm a judgmental person.
Well,
And
well, I consider myself someone who doesn't judge.
well,
So
yeah, I
yeah.
know maybe it doesn't apply, but well, everyone judges, but you know, as I said, there's a righteous judgment. Maybe you're a righteous judge, but that's what it means. That's what it means,
Fascinating.
Daniel. Yeah,
Interesting.
Daniel. I was always Daniel in grammar school. You know, the teachers and Daniel. You know, but I'm Danny or Dan. Everybody calls me Dan or
Same
Daniel.
deal. Same deal.
Yeah, yeah. When writing you, I wasn't sure whether to write Dan.
What?
I thought it might be too informal.
No, and people have asked me, "Are you a Danny or Dan?" I was trying to make it clear, but Danny's fine. No, but I could honestly talk to you for a lot longer, but it's been awesome to hear your story and how I love that you sort of went full circle in a way and went back to that really special moment when you were dealing with something quite horrendous at the time, and like I say,
And
you're
it
now
hasn't evolved. The process is exactly the same.
exactly.
I do it now as if I was 6 years old.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it because there's a tendency to take something and then think you have to overcomplicate it, but that's what it was in its original form. So again, it's not easy to just go back to that and bring it forward, but
Right.
I'm definitely keen to try this technique, this
We'll give it a
non-contemplative
shot.
technique.
Well, I'll send you a link. I'll give you a guest pass.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Is there anything we haven't covered, perhaps for somebody who might be
No, I
struggling,
mean,
like for somebody who might be struggling right now? Is there
for
anything you
someone
would
who's
suggest?
it depends on what they're struggling. You mean struggling with a bad habit or a vice or that sort of thing, or just struggling with life
Struggling to
or,
get out of bed.
ooh, struggling. Yeah. Well, that would be obviously someone you would probably characterize as being depressed, right? Someone struggling to get out of bed. If you're struggling to get out of bed, I've been there. I've been there. I had, you know, we didn't cover this, but they put me on uh, Effexor and Wellbutrin, and I was clinically diagnosed as clinically depressed, and also ADD. Before there was
A-
ADHD, there was ADD,
Attention
so
deficit disorder. Yeah.
disorder. Yeah, they put me
Yeah.
on Adderall at the time. You know, I went to a psychiatrist and they tested me, and it took a whole day of testing, and they came back with a 12-page report, and the they said, you know, you're the worst case of ADD we've ever seen, something like that. You know,
Yeah.
oh well, okay, well, thank you. Here, take these drugs, and I haven't had that many years, haven't had that stuff. But if you're struggling, and I do know what struggle is, if you're struggling to get out of bed, that means it usually means that you're judging yourself. We have this. I'm not a psychologist, but they have names for all of this stuff: bipolar disorder and clinical depression, and all this sort of stuff. And I would tell such a person the reason that everything goes. I say that all of the reasons for depression, all these I'm not talking about mental disorders caused by having a hit in the head or anything like that, but disorders like depression, anxiety, um, that sort of thing, not being able to get out of bed because you can't motivate, judging, it all comes down to the same thing. It all comes down. I said there was two forces in the universe, right? There's more, but there's love and there's hate. And nobody wants to think of themselves as being a hateful person. That just sounds too severe. So we have a better word, and we've used it here today, resentment. Resentment is really a form of
Mm.
hate, but it sounds too severe. So I resent them. I don't like them. Uh, I'm irritated and annoyed by them. That's that playing God stuff. When you get lost in that, when you get sucked into that stream of thinking and you can't get out, eventually you're going to get the idea, you're going to start judging yourself. You're going to start judging yourself. And when you start judging yourself, that's when you start to lose faith in yourself, faith in your abilities, and you don't want to get out of bed because to get out of bed, you're going to have to face yourself and you're going to have to see your inadequacies and see your imperfections, and you have to see the cruelties and the injustices of the world, and you know how they make you feel. They make you feel horrible. They make you feel hateful. People, there are people who can't leave the home. They can't go out of their home because if they walked outside and saw the sky was blue, they would resent the blueness. Well, that's because they're lost in their head and something is telling them that. Something is telling. They have a name for that, ego.
Mm.
uh, and your ego, I don't look at ego as some facet of human psychology. Not that I'm down, but I like psychology. I mean, the psychologists get a lot wrong. I study psychology, but I'm not a psychologist. And one of the things that I realized with psychology is the whole field of psychology is largely theoretic. They don't know a whole lot. So behavioral psychology. When someone is behaving that way, I say it's due to resentment. It goes back down to something deep inside that they're angry about and they're not facing about themselves. And maybe they're not taking substances. Maybe they're not drinking, they're not drugging, they're not sexing, they're not living, they're not getting involved with whatever it is that they could get addicted to, whether it be entertainment or you can abuse anything. You've been in the music business. There's a wonderful use for music. Music is it's a communication device. You can communicate emotions and ideas and everything through music. Well, there are also people, and I did it, who abuse music, who use it as a drug. You know, if you're gonna turn Metallica up to 11 and turn out the world, maybe you're not listening to the words.
It's funny you
You know?
say that I actually played music as a form of escapism, which isn't
You think so?
necessarily, which because I felt that I couldn't feel joy. I struggled to feel joy myself, but when I was playing in
Uh,
bands, the music would make me feel, because music has this ability to make you feel, that the major keys or whatever can make you feel happy. So
Absolutely. It's uplifting.
yeah, which I don't know was the best approach in terms of like becoming a better drummer, but I think I was, when I was in the room jamming and playing music. I mean, it's a healthier outlet, like form of escapism. I think it's one of the not as potentially destructive, but the destructive thing about it was the world around it, and the
Right.
kind of, that's a whole thing of its own. But it's interesting you say that because I think I was actually playing music to escape
Drumming is different.
stuff.
Drumming is because drums have notes, but it's almost, for lack of a better word, it's very visceral, you
It's
know.
very visceral, and I had a life-changing kind of moment on the drums, which was very a spirit. I had a spiritual experience on the drums, which changed my
Oh
life.
wow. I
So,
wish I I wish I
so
knew what that was.
yeah, just a very, important drumming experience, an experience that reconnected me to the instrument I'd turned my back on for some years, and I realized how important it was for me in terms of creative fulfillment, and that perhaps I needed to get back into that.
Yeah.
That's a very short version of a unique
So
experience.
as someone who has abused music, like I have, you know that there's a way to approach music without abusing it, just like anything, just like food, just like sex, just like alcohol. You should be able to take a sip of wine with your meal and not turn into an alcoholic. Well, it's the same thing with thoughts. You can abuse thoughts. People abuse thoughts. They get lost in thoughts, and that's when it turns on them, and that's when they lose their ability to get out of bed. Because if they get out of bed, they're going to have to deal with the world, and they're judging the world, and it makes them feel horrible. It's painful to live. Life is painful. So my advice is to step back out of your head. Just come back, just like I described that I did. Come back, watch thoughts, watch thinking. And anybody that does that is going to eventually, you're going to wake up and you're going to see, and I can't tell you what you're going to see because that would sound like I'm encouraging people. That's just more thought. But you will see your true self, and it might be a little bit painful to see how judgmental maybe and how playing, maybe you've played God, and now you're playing God in yourself and judging yourself, and that starts to lift. It just starts to lift automatically. There's nothing, you can't be hypnotized out of it. You can't be psychoanalyzed out of it. It's just something that happens internally. You just wake up and you'll be able to live again. Yeah.
Have you got a challenge you might like to suggest for the audience?
By Jove, I believe I do. Well, yeah, I'm prepared. Everybody may as well know I've prepared this because I know that you ask about a challenge.
Preparation is appreciated.
That's right. And I wrote quite a bit here, but I really didn't have to write it down. The challenge. See, the word challenge is kind of funky to me because challenge connotes ambition and willfulness and all of that sort of thing. But it actually is a good word because the way I approach it is the challenge is to meet the challenge. That's the challenge, is to meet the challenge then the challenge is the temptation that I talk about to become upset. Every time, just waking up in the morning, from the moment we wake up in the morning to the time we go to bed at night, it's just one thing after the other. It could be little things, it could be big things, just little upsets. It could be a mosquito buzzing around your ear, or someone flips you the bird in the traffic situation, or whatever it is, or a politician says something stupid on TV. Whatever it is, these are all temptations to become upset. So the challenge, those are challenges. Challenges against the emotional challenges. I say the challenges, every time that happens, even if you're not meditating, if you're not using non-contemplative meditation, you can do this. Practicing it makes it easier as you go along, but just watch the temptation to become upset. Watch the temptation to become emotional, and just step back from it and observe it. Don't judge it. Don't make excuses for it. Don't say, "Oh, that person, they're just having a bad day." No, don't make excuses for it. Just watch it for what it is. And after a while, you'll see it becomes second nature. And after a while, the things that upset you won't upset you so much, and the people that upset you on purpose will also lose the power that they have over you, whether it be in a relationship or a politician or an advertising agency. They upset because you could be upset with negative things. You can also be upset with positive things, right? Women upset men all the time in a positive way, don't they? Just a wiggle in the right way, and they've got you. They've got your attention, and now you kind of do what they want. And it's the same thing with everything. Just step back and watch.
It's awesome. You're essentially encouraging one to be in a less reactive state.
Less reactive, and when you're less reactive, your critical thinking kicks in, your intuition kicks in, and your conscience is reactivated, and you do the next right thing automatically without even realizing that it's happening.
And you're right in that it takes the the power or whatever it may be off the other it deflates whatever they may be trying to do, because you're coming at it from actually a place of peace, as opposed to
Right.
you're on the attack or the defense, or you're whatever it may be. And that can be confronting to people, especially if they're expecting a reaction out of you, you know.
Yeah, if they don't get a reaction, that could upset them. And
Yeah.
phooey on them, I say.
No, that's a great one. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
I enjoyed it immensely.
There you go, guys. Honest ratings for the show on Apple are appreciated. If you have a guest suggestion, please feel free to reach out on my website at danielthomas.co. I'm also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.